The Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Union shimmered with artificial starlight, an illusion of the cosmos projected onto the ceiling. Representatives from thousands of species filled the vast chamber, their voices merging into an unintelligible drone of clicks, growls, and reverberating tones. At the center of it all, atop a raised platform, High Chancellor Vorzak of the Zephyr Dominion tapped his clawed fingers against the polished surface of the speaker's podium. The chamber fell silent. "The matter of Sol 3, known as Earth, is now before us," Vorzak intoned, his voice like grinding stone. "This species, this humanity, has been deemed incompatible with galactic harmony. Their history is one of war, insurrection, and ceaseless expansion. Their continued independence is an affront to order. The time has come to decide their fate." A murmur rippled through the assembly. From the far side of the hall, a representative of the Thrall brood, a chitinous being with mandibles that clicked as it spoke, raised a spindly arm. "They are inefficient. Their grasp of interstellar travel is primitive. Yet they harbor defiance as if they belong among us. We should end this delusion. Let them serve us as nature intended." A thunderous roar of approval followed. The sentiment had long been festering within the Union. Humanity was an anomaly, barely stepping into the void of space yet daring to claim sovereignty. Their kind had already skirmished with minor member states, proving their volatile nature. It was decided. One by one the representatives cast their votes. It was a rare moment of unanimity. Every species, from the cold-blooded Korthid enclave to the silicon-based Mirad collective, agreed. Earth would be subjugated. Their people would be shackled, their resources claimed, their defiance extinguished. Within days, the largest armada ever assembled in the history of the Galactic Union set course for Earth. Hundreds of dreadnoughts, their hulls black as the void, spearheaded the fleet. Carriers transported millions of ground troops, drawn from warlike races who had conquered countless worlds before. Battlecruisers, bristling with energy cannons capable of reducing continents to glass, loomed in the darkness of space as they reached the Sol system. Admiral Syvax of the Dralcor Legion, a towering figure with glistening obsidian scales, stood at the bridge of the flagship Tyrant's Will. His golden eyes regarded the blue-green world below with disdain. "Pathetic," he sneered. "They haven't even raised planetary defenses. Shall we transmit the surrender demand?" his lieutenant inquired. Syvax let out a low rumble of amusement. "A formality. Their compliance is inevitable. Open the channel." The ultimatum was sent. A simple message: kneel or be destroyed. Silence. A minute passed. Then 5. Then 10. No response. A frown creased Syvax's ridged brow. How typical. They wish to appear defiant, but fear has undoubtedly paralyzed them. Begin orbital deployment. Let them understand the futility of resistance. Dropships rained from the sky, their descent masked as streaks of fire against the night. Cities would fall by sunrise. Humanity, they believed, would break as all others had before. Yet as the first battalions touched down, they were met not with panic-stricken civilians, but something else: emptiness. The streets of major cities were eerily quiet. No columns of refugees, no military convoys scrambling to counter the invasion. A strange unease settled over the invaders. Then the first explosions erupted. Shattered concrete and fire engulfed the landing zones as hidden charges detonated beneath the invaders' feet. Entire squadrons of elite warriors were vaporized in an instant. Before the shock could settle, the echoes of gunfire filled the air. From alleys, from rooftops, from the shadows, humanity struck. They were supposed to be weak, undisciplined, inferior. Instead, the aliens found themselves hunted. Drones hacked into the Union's communication networks, feeding them false data, rerouting supply lines into ambushes. Weapons-grade viruses infiltrated their cyber systems, locking down ships mid-air, rendering them useless. Cities became death traps, every corridor a kill zone, every building a fortress. Snipers picked off officers before orders could be relayed. The invaders expected fear. What they found was calculation and cruelty. Captured alien soldiers were not treated as prisoners of war. They were broadcasted across intercepted comms, pleading for mercy that never came. One by one they vanished, their fates unknown, but the message was clear: humanity would not bow. Days passed, then weeks. What should have been an easy conquest had turned into a nightmare. Entire regiments vanished into the ruins, their final transmissions cut off by distant human laughter. The dreadnought tyrants will burned in orbit, its hull breached by a weapon Union tacticians swore Earth could not possess. Admiral Sci-Fi, once so confident, stood in his war chamber, trembling as he listened to the reports. Entire planetary assault divisions, erased. Command outposts, compromised. Fleet coordination, severed. It was impossible. How are they doing this? He snarled, slamming his claws against the holomap, which flickered with countless red markers. Losses. Too many losses. A technician, sweat pooling beneath his scaled brow, hesitated before answering. Admiral, these tactics, we have never encountered anything like them before. Because they are desperate? Sci-Fi growled. No, the technician said, his voice barely a whisper. Because they were never weak to begin with. The Admiral's blood ran cold. They had come to enslave a primitive world, a helpless people. Instead they had awakened something else. Something far worse. And they had voted for it. The war had only just begun. Smoke choked the sky, a thick, acrid haze rising from the shattered remains of alien war machines. The once pristine streets of Earth's cities were now graveyards of twisted metal and broken bodies, both human and extraterrestrial. The war had not merely escalated, it had transformed into something primal, something the invaders had never anticipated. Deep within the ruins of what had once been Washington, D.C., Colonel Elias Vance crouched behind a collapsed section of concrete, his rifle cradled in his arms. His earpiece crackled with fragmented reports. Ambushes, detonations, silent deaths in the night. Humanity was not just fighting. It was hunting. They're moving through the financial district, whispered Captain Renko, her voice steady despite the carnage. 3rd Battalion intercepted a supply convoy. No survivors. Vance exhaled slowly. Another victory. Another step closer to turning this war into a massacre. But not of humans. The aliens had come expecting swift subjugation, their towering warforms striding into battle with arrogance bred from centuries of conquest. Their mistake had been assuming Earth was like every other world they had crushed beneath their boots. They did not understand what it meant to fight a species that had spent its entire existence perfecting the art of war. A low, rumbling vibration coursed through the rubble beneath them. Vance glanced up. Through the smoke, the silhouette of a Zephyr war beast lumbered forward. A towering quadrupedal construct of living metal and plasma-forged bone. It was meant to instill fear, to break the will of lesser species. Instead, Vance smiled. Fire at will. From the shadows, missile tubes emerged. A synchronized whistle cut through the air as a dozen warheads screamed toward the monster. The first struck its leg, shearing through armor and sending it crashing sideways. The second found its core, detonating with a concussive force that sent shockwaves through the ruins. The beast collapsed, its wailing death cries swallowed by the roar of flames. Not a single human had been seen. Across the globe the same grim symphony played out. The Union's fleets burned in orbit, their supply lines severed by surgical strikes on logistics hubs. Their battalions were decimated not by direct confrontation, but by relentless, calculated extermination. Mines hidden in civilian vehicles, poison rations, hacked combat systems. Humanity was fighting a war no galactic empire had prepared for. In the command bunker beneath what had once been a bustling city, Admiral Sci-Fi paced, his golden eyes darting across the holographic map flickering in the dim light. Red blips marked lost battalions, entire units wiped out overnight. His fleet, his legions were dying. This is impossible, he hissed. They should have surrendered. His officers stood in grim silence. None daring to speak the truth he refused to acknowledge. A transmission crackled to life. It was audio only, the voice distorted yet unmistakably human. You wanted Earth. A pause, the faint trace of amusement in the tone. Now you get to keep it. The transmission ended. Sci-Fi slammed a fist against the console. Enough of this. He turned to his strategists, his patience fraying. Deploy the purge weapons. If they refuse to kneel, then we will erase them. There were no protests. Within the hour, the order rippled through the remaining fleets. The war was over. Earth would be reduced to cinders. As the first purge ships descended, their payloads primed to unleash planetary devastation, something unexpected happened. They vanished. Not in a blaze of light, not in a sudden catastrophic detonation, just gone. One moment they were on course, the next their signals simply ceased. No debris. No transmissions. Just silence. Panic spread through the Union's remaining forces. This was no accident. Something had taken them. Then the retaliation began. On the outer fringes of the fleet, ships that had not even engaged in combat suddenly found themselves compromised. Engine failures, firewalls overridden, airlocks opening to the void. Battleships turned their weapons on each other, unable to override their own systems. Entire divisions went dark, their fates unknown. Earth was no longer merely defending itself. It was striking back. Deep within an undisclosed subterranean facility, a group of human engineers watched the chaos unfold, their faces illuminated by the glow of countless monitors. Project Revenant is operational, one reported, voice calm despite the enormity of what had just transpired. General Cassandra Holt nodded. Begin Phase 2. In orbit, the remaining Union ships suddenly received new transmissions. At first they were dismissed as intercepted enemy chatter, until they realized the voices were their own. Distress calls from ships still intact. Orders that had never been given. Entirely new battle plans appearing in their systems, overriding command structures. And then the true horror began. Union soldiers found their suits locking up, their weapons refusing to fire. Biometric readings flatlined, not from physical wounds, but as if their very consciousness had been stripped from them. Panic gave way to terror. Admiral Syvax watched as his officers collapsed around him, their eyes vacant, their bodies unresponsive. Only he remained. A final transmission cut through the void. You thought we were prey. Pause. Now you understand. The war was no longer about survival. It was about retribution. The Galactic Union had never known fear. It had crushed rebellions, reduced entire civilizations to memory, and rewritten history to suit its conquests. Yet now it burned. Admiral Syvax stood on the bridge of his last surviving warship, his claws digging into the metal railing as he watched the carnage unfold. The once glorious armada of the Union was a wreckage field drifting through the void. Broken hulls, shattered dreadnoughts, lifeless escape pods spinning aimlessly, the remains of a force that had once ruled the stars. His fleet was gone. His legions silenced. And Earth still stood. The transmission had been looping for hours now, echoing through every surviving Union frequency. A simple message repeated in flawless galactic standard. Surrender. There will be no second offer. Syvax's throat was dry. Surrender? The word felt foreign, repulsive, but what choice remained? Even now, scattered reports came in from what was left of the invasion force. Some soldiers had thrown down their weapons hoping for mercy. They had not been seen again. Others attempted escape only to find their ships inoperable, their drives hacked before they could flee. Some, the foolish and the desperate, still fought. They did not last long. A shrill chime cut through the silence, signaling an incoming transmission. Not from one of his own but from them. With a deep breath, Syvax accepted the call. The image that flickered into view was unmistakably human. A woman stood before him, clad in dark military fatigues, her expression unreadable. The background behind her was obscured, but Syvax recognized the subtle hum of active war machinery. This was no bureaucrat. This was a soldier. "This is General Cassandra Holt of the Terran Defense Initiative," she said, her voice even. "You are Syvax of the Dralcor Legion, correct?" His jaw tightened. "I am." The woman studied him, her gaze sharp, assessing. "Then you already know why we're speaking." He did. It was a formality. A final humiliation before the inevitable. But he would not beg. He would not grovel before an inferior race. "You want my surrender," he said. "I will not give it." Holt tilted her head slightly. "Oh, I don't think you understand the situation, Admiral." She stepped forward, the screen adjusting to follow her movement. "We aren't here to negotiate. We aren't here to accept terms. The moment you crossed into our system, you forfeited that luxury." The screen flickered and new images replaced her face. Footage from across the war front. Union officers bound in chains, warships stripped of their command functions, entire regiments huddled together, their weapons confiscated. But there was no footage of prisoners being executed, no displays of cruelty. Only the captured, awaiting whatever fate humanity had deemed for them. We could wipe you out, Holt continued. Easily. But extermination isn't justice. That's what you do. Her expression hardened. Humanity doesn't erase its enemies. It makes examples of them. Syvax's breath caught. Not wiped out. But kept. Contained. Punished. The humiliation of it burned hotter than the wreckage outside. You think we will submit to slavery? He spat. Holt gave a short, humorless laugh. Slavery? Oh. You're not worth the effort. Syvax stiffened. Then what? The screen changed again. A star chart. The Union's core territories, highlighted in red. Earth was no longer just defending itself. It was advancing. You came here expecting conquest, Holt said, her voice quieter now but no less dangerous. Now we're bringing it to you. It was impossible. Humanity had no empire, no fleets beyond their own system. Yet as Syvax stared at the chart he knew. They had taken the Union's technology. They had dissected its strategies. They had learned faster and more efficiently than any species before them. And they were coming. You can resist, Holt continued, but we both know how that ends. She leaned in slightly and for the first time Syvax saw something in her eyes that sent ice through his veins. Not hatred. Not vengeance. Certainty. The transmission cut out. Silence filled the bridge. For the first time in its long and terrible history, the Galactic Union, the conquerors of 1,000 worlds, the architects of countless subjugations, knew what it was like to be prey. The Galactic Union's homeworlds had never known the shadow of war. For centuries, their fleets had crushed insurrections before they could take root, their soldiers marching unopposed on foreign soil. They had believed themselves untouchable. Then came the silence. It started at the fringes of Union space. Communications lost, outposts abandoned. Supply convoys vanished without a trace. Fleets dispatched to investigate never returned. The High Council dismissed the reports at first, unwilling to believe that humanity, a species they had once deemed insignificant, could be responsible. But soon the truth became undeniable. Humanity was not just retaliating. It was dismantling the Union. On the capital world of Zephyr Prime, Supreme Chancellor Vorzak stood in the Grand War Chamber, his claws flexing against the stone surface of the command table. Around him, representatives from the surviving member species murmured in panicked voices, their usual arrogance shattered. Gone were the days of casual debate and slow-moving bureaucracy. Fear had consumed them. A mirrored delegate, its crystalline form flickering with stress fractures, spoke first. They are everywhere. Every shadow, every system we thought secure. They do not occupy. They do not negotiate. They erase. They're disrupting our entire network. A thrall broodlord hissed, mandibles clicking erratically. Entire colonies have gone dark. There are no distress signals, no survivors. Just silence. Vorzak's heavy brow furrowed. What of our fleets? A tense pause. No one wanted to answer. The Zorthian war chief, a massive being with hardened carapace plates, finally spoke. Lost. The 6th and 9th Armada never arrived at their destinations. The 14th sent a distress signal before nothing. A weight settled over the chamber. The once mighty fleets that had brought the Union to dominance were now little more than ghost stories. Then without warning the room darkened. The command table flickered, its holographic display hijacked. A new transmission forced its way onto their network. A human. The figure stood in full military uniform, dark fabric marked with the sigil of Earth's new war machine. General Cassandra Holt. Her expression was impassive, but her eyes burned with the cold fire of inevitability. Leaders of the Union, she said, her voice measured, precise. We have reached the end of your war. A low, anxious murmur rippled through the chamber. Holt continued, unfazed. You came to Earth expecting conquest. You voted to enslave us. You decided our fate without ever considering that we might refuse. She took a slow breath. When she spoke again, her words carried the weight of finality. Now we decide yours. The chamber erupted in chaos. Some demanded surrender. Others screamed for counterattacks. A few, the oldest and most hardened among them, simply stared in silent horror. Vorzak leaned forward, his voice dangerously low. You dare threaten the Union? Holt's gaze sharpened. I don't make threats, Chancellor. She gestured off-screen and the transmission shifted. A live feed from orbit. Above Cypher Prime, the impossible had arrived. Human warships, sleek and angular, moved like phantoms between the Union's defenses. They bore no emblems, no call signs, only the blackened hulls of vessels that had been forged in the crucible of war. They drifted effortlessly past the planet's automated sentries, their systems overridden before they could fire. Then the feed shifted again. Dozens of Union-controlled planets, falling. Not to orbital bombardments, not to ground invasions, but to something far worse. Infrastructure crippled. Communications dead. Entire cities vanishing without a trace, their populations simply gone. Holt's voice returned, quieter now. You gave us no choice but to become something new. You forced us to evolve. Vorzak's hands clenched into fists. And what exactly have you become? For the first time Holt smiled. Your successors. The transmission ended. The chamber sat in stunned silence. Then in the distance the alarms began to wail. The silence stretched through the chamber, thick and suffocating. The Union's most powerful leaders stood frozen, staring at the screen that now dictated their fate. The prompt was simple. A choice, presented in a manner they had never offered their own victims. Surrender. Accept judgment. Or resist. Be erased. Chancellor Vorzak's mandibles twitched, his breath shallow. He had commanded entire fleets, orchestrated the enslavement of countless species, crushed rebellions before they could even begin. And yet, as he looked at the cold, unfeeling words on the screen, he felt something unfamiliar clawing at the edges of his mind. Powerlessness. The mirrored delegate was the first to break. Its crystalline form flickered, its voice a desperate whisper. If we surrender, what becomes of us? Holt did not answer immediately. She let the weight of the question settle over the chamber, pressing into them like the void itself. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. You will stand trial. A murmur rippled through the gathered officials, but none dared to speak. The concept was alien to them. The Union did not try its enemies. It dictated their punishment. Their crimes had never required justification, only execution. Vorzak exhaled sharply. And if we resist? Holt's eyes met his. You won't. The words sent a chill through him. Not a threat. Not a boast. Just the truth. He knew it as well as she did. The fleets were gone. The systems had collapsed. Their weapons would not fire, their defenses would not hold. Humanity had not merely broken the Union's grip on the galaxy, it had unraveled the very fabric of its existence. And still, something deep inside him fought against the inevitable. He was Vorzak, Supreme Chancellor of the Galactic Union. He had shaped the tides of history with his own hands. He would not fall to a species that only cycles ago had been nothing more than an afterthought. His claws curled into fists. You think you are better than us, he snarled. You believe this will end with justice. But there is no justice, human. Only power. Holt's expression did not change. And yet you have none. The words struck like a blade. A tremor shook the chamber, distant but unmistakable. From beyond the viewport, the sky darkened as the first of the captured Union fleets began their descent. Hundreds of ships, once symbols of oppression, now bearing the will of those they had subjugated. The mirrored delegate collapsed to its knees. It's over, it whispered. Vorzak trembled, rage and terror warring within him. For the first time in his life, there was no escape, no strategy, no final act of defiance. There was only the vote. Slowly, one by one, the delegates turned to the screen. The choice awaited them. Surrender. Or be forgotten. The vote was cast. The Chancellor's claw hovered over the control panel for a breath longer than necessary, his mind warring against his body's instinct for survival. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to resist, to die fighting rather than accept defeat. But the moment his gaze drifted to the viewport, to the descending fleets, the truth became undeniable. This was no temporary setback. No calculated retreat. No delayed retaliation. The Union was gone. With a final, reluctant motion, Vorzak pressed the command. A sharp chime rang through the chamber, confirming what they had once deemed impossible. The Union had surrendered. For the first time in millennia, the conquerors would answer for their crimes. The screen flickered, the simple prompt replaced with a new directive. Stand by. Judgment pending. The words pulsed with a quiet finality, a silent promise that humanity's reckoning was not yet complete. The chamber fell into uneasy stillness, broken only by the mirrored delegate's heavy exhale. "What now?" it whispered. Holt's voice was unreadable. "Now you wait." A shudder rippled through the building as unseen forces locked onto the structure. A low, thrumming hum filled the air, a sound foreign yet oddly familiar. Transportation beams. Not for imprisonment. Not for execution. But for something far worse. Exile. The realization struck Vorzak like a physical blow. Humanity would not grant them the dignity of a warrior's death, nor the twisted mercy of enslavement. Instead, they would be taken from their throne world, stripped of their power, and cast adrift in a galaxy they had once ruled with iron talons. There would be no monuments to their legacy. No remnants of their influence. No whispers of their former might. Only silence. The light engulfed them, cold and unyielding. As the Supreme Chancellor's form dissolved into nothingness, his final thought was not of defiance, nor regret, nor even fear. It was the sickening, gnawing understanding that the fate he had forced upon countless others had finally found him. The cold faded first. Then the silence. Vorzak's body materialized in a place that felt wrong in every possible way. The air was thick and humid, carrying the scent of something ancient and unclean. The ground beneath him was uneven, damp, and alive with the distant skittering of unseen creatures. The dim glow of bioluminescent fungi cast grotesque, shifting shadows against the cavern walls. He was not alone. Around him, the other Union leaders appeared, one by one, their forms wavering as the transportation field dissipated. The mirrored delegate trembled, its crystalline structure refracting the sickly light. The Thrall broodlord flexed its mandibles, scenting the air with rapid, panicked clicks. They had been sent here together, but for what purpose? Vorzak straightened, forcing himself to suppress the rising tide of unease. This was not how he had envisioned the end. He had expected prison cells, interrogations, a long, drawn-out spectacle of retribution. Not this. He turned sharply as a new sound reached his ears, a deep, guttural rumble, neither mechanical nor natural. The walls trembled and something massive shifted beyond the glow of the fungal light. Then the truth struck him. This was no prison. It was a graveyard. The realization settled over the group like a lead weight. They had been deposited on a world long since abandoned, a place stripped of its resources, its people, its history. A forgotten planet cast to the void. And they, once rulers of the galaxy, were now no more than the latest addition to its long list of casualties. The Thrall broodlord's mandibles clicked furiously. "This is not exile," it hissed. "This is execution by another name." No response came. No announcement from their captors. No parting words from humanity. The sentence had been delivered and the galaxy had already moved on. The darkness pressed in, stretching endlessly beyond their sight. For the first time in his life, Supreme Chancellor Vorzak truly understood what it meant to be powerless. The darkness was alive. Vorzak could feel it pressing against him, not just a lack of light but something deeper, something sentient. The bioluminescent fungi cast weak pools of blue and green illumination across the cavern walls, but beyond their glow, the void stretched endlessly, filled with distant rustling and the low, resonant hum of something vast and unseen. The mirrored delegate shuddered, its crystalline limbs trembling as it clutched itself. "We must move," it whispered, though no one answered. The Union leaders, once the architects of conquest, now stood like prey on unfamiliar ground. The Thrall broodlord's mandibles clicked erratically as it turned in circles, scanning for threats. The Zorthian war chief, whose kind had shattered entire civilizations with brute force, took an unsteady step backward, armor plates rattling. Vorzak exhaled slowly, his instincts warring with the cold logic of their situation. They had been left here for a reason. Humanity did not act without purpose. This was not some barren wasteland where they would wither and starve in isolation. This was something worse. A trial. He forced his voice to remain steady. "We were placed here deliberately. That means there's something to find." The Thrall turned toward him, eyes gleaming in the dim light. "Something to find?" Let out a sharp chitter that might have been laughter. "Or something that will find us?" A deep, distant rumble punctuated the words, shaking the cavern floor. A silence followed, thick and expectant. Then a sound like tearing flesh. Wet, deliberate, impossibly close. The mirrored gasped, its crystalline body flickering with sudden erratic pulses of light. The glow from the fungi trembled as if responding to the disturbance. The air grew thick, humid and wrong. Something had awoken. Vorzak did not waste time. He turned sharply, scanning the cavern walls, searching for a path forward. The humans had left them here for judgment, but judgment did not always mean death. Sometimes it meant survival. "We move," he ordered, voice sharp and commanding. "Now." No one argued. Even fear could be controlled when faced with a greater threat. They walked, their steps uneven, breath held as the unseen presence followed them, never too far, never too close. The bioluminescent glow pulsed in a rhythm that did not match their movements. Something deeper was at work here, something watching, waiting. Vorzak pressed forward, his mind racing. Humanity had not slaughtered them outright. It had not erased them with fire or steel. It had left them here. To prove something. To learn something. Or perhaps simply to suffer. The darkness shifted again, and this time something reached back. The cavern pulsed with something beyond sight or sound, a presence that coiled through the air like a living current. Vorzak could feel it pressing against his exoskeleton, a weightless but undeniable force. It was neither cold nor warm, neither hostile nor welcoming. It simply was. The others felt it too. The mirrored delegate's crystalline form dimmed further, its light now barely visible. The Thrall Broodlord's mandibles clicked, no longer in challenge but in growing unease. Even the Zorthian war chief, who had once torn the limbs from prisoners for sport, stood stiff with unspoken fear. They had all sensed predators before. This was not a predator. This was something beyond hunger. They moved forward step by step, keeping close to the uneven rock walls. The bioluminescent fungi pulsed as if responding to their presence, flickering in waves that did not match their footfalls. The cavern stretched onward, endless and shifting, the walls curving unnaturally. Then the whisper came. It was not a sound in the air, not a vibration through the stone. It was inside. A slow, curling thought that was not their own. "Do you understand now?" Vorzak's breath halted. The voice was not human, not alien, not even alive in the way he understood life. It did not carry emotion, only weight. The mirrored stumbled back, shaking its head. "No," it whispered, as if denying the very idea would banish it. The voice did not relent. "You took. You burned. You ruled. Pause. Did you ever wonder what it felt like?" The walls trembled, not with movement but with memory. The stone became flesh. The air thickened into something viscous, clinging to their limbs. Shapes coiled at the edges of the dim light, not seen but felt, their presence stretching beyond vision, beyond time. Vorzak clenched his claws. His mind raced through every piece of knowledge he had gathered over centuries of conquest. This was not an execution. This was not an exile. This was a reckoning. "You think this is justice?" His voice was steady, but it was not defiance. It was something closer to understanding. "This is vengeance." Pause. Then the whisper returned, curling through his thoughts like smoke. "Oh. This is remembrance." The cavern shuddered again. And the past began to wake. The walls rippled like the surface of disturbed water, shifting, stretching, pulling away from the form of a cavern and into something else. Something alive with memory. The air thickened, humming with echoes of voices long silenced. Then the first scream came. It was not a sound of the present, nor of any creature in the room. It belonged to another time, another world, but it filled the space with unbearable clarity. A shriek of terror, of breaking bones and burning flesh, of a life extinguished under the weight of an empire that had never cared to learn the names of those it crushed. Vorzak's vision wavered as the cavern around him melted into a battlefield. Cities reduced to ember and ruin. The shattered remains of a species whose name had been lost to time. He did not remember this world. But it remembered him. The mirrored collapsed to its knees, grasping at its own head, crystalline veins pulsing erratically. "No," it whispered. "This is not real." The voice returned, curling around them like smoke. It was real for them. The scene shifted. Another planet. Another war. This time he recognized it. The scorched husk of the Zioth homeworld, its cities drowned in blackened craters, its sky forever choked with the dust of the dead. The Zioth had resisted Union rule, believing they could stand against its might. Their civilization had been burned to its foundations, their history erased. Vorzak had ordered that purge himself. His breath caught as the Zayth appeared before him, not as they had died but as they had lived. He saw the elders in their council chambers, the warriors rallying to protect their people, the children looking up at the sky as the first orbital bombardments began. And they were looking at him. The illusion, if it was an illusion, did not trap him as a passive observer. It dragged him into the moment, forcing him to stand among them, to hear their thoughts, to feel the dread in their bones. They did not see him as Supreme Chancellor Vorzak, ruler of the Union. They saw him as the specter of their annihilation. The Zayth elders turned, their faces twisted with anguish, their words piercing into him like blades. "We begged for mercy." The warriors, defiant but doomed, whispered, "We fought for nothing." The children, clutching their families in the final moments before the fire, simply asked, "Why?" And then the fire came again. The Zayth burned just as they had in the past, and Vorzak was inside it, feeling the heat, the suffocation, the last desperate grasp at life before it was torn away. He screamed, but his voice did not exist. The Murid and the Thrall suffered beside him, writhing against memories that were not their own but bore their signature all the same. The Zorthian war chief staggered, eyes wide, reliving the slaughter it had commanded with cold efficiency. There was no enemy to fight. No means of escape. Only memory. The voice spoke once more, quiet but absolute. "Now you understand." The flames died. The cavern returned. The silence stretched. And for the first time in his existence, Supreme Chancellor Vorzak knew the weight of every soul he had taken. Vorzak collapsed to his knees, the weight of memory pressing down on him like an ocean, endless and suffocating. The others gasped for air, though there was no smoke, no fire, only the aftershocks of suffering that did not belong to them, yet had been of their making. The Murid delegate convulsed, its crystalline limbs flickering erratically, unable to process the pain it had just endured. The Thrall broodlord, once so proud, so unshakable, huddled against the cavern wall, its mandibles clicking in panicked, senseless patterns. The Zorthian war chief, who had spent a lifetime believing in the brutal purity of conquest, simply sat motionless, his breathing shallow, his gaze hollow. No one spoke. There was nothing to say. The cavern pulsed again, not with new visions, but with an understanding that settled deep into their bones. They had believed themselves gods, rulers of the lesser, architects of fate. But now they knew the truth. They had never been gods. They had been monsters. A voice, distant yet undeniable, echoed through the stillness. "What remains when the fear fades?" Vorzak's claws curled against the damp rock, his mind struggling to grasp the meaning behind the words. Was this their punishment? To relive the suffering they had inflicted? Or was there something else? Something beyond mere retribution? His gaze drifted to the fungi lining the walls, their faint glow steady, unyielding. Life endured. Even here. His mind recoiled at the thought. Could it be that this was not just a prison, not just a final act of vengeance? Could it be a test? The realization slithered through him, slow and insidious. If this place had been meant to break them, to destroy them utterly, then why show them this? Why force them to feel, to understand? Plus, he forced himself to rise, his limbs shaking with the weight of 1,000 unspoken regrets. His voice, when it came, was hoarse but resolute. "What do you want from us?" The air shifted. Pause. Then finally an answer. "To choose." The ground beneath them trembled, not with force but with possibility. And for the first time since their exile began, Vorzak realized that survival was not the only thing at stake. Vorzak's breathing steadied as the final word echoed through the cavern. To choose. The others stirred, sluggish, their bodies weakened by the weight of what they had seen. The Murid delegate's crystalline limbs flickered with a faint, unsteady glow, its form still quivering from the overwhelming rush of memory. The Thrall broodlord pressed against the damp cavern wall, mandibles clamped shut in a grimace that was neither anger nor defiance, only silence. The Zorthian war chief, so accustomed to strength, looked drained, his great armored frame slumped in a posture that no warrior should ever assume. Vorzak's claws curled against the cold rock. He had always believed in power, its necessity, its inevitability. Conquest had been a simple equation. Strength was law and weakness was a death sentence. It had never been personal. But it had been personal for them. The Zayth, the countless other races they had erased, the civilizations they had left to rot in the void, All of them had names, had homes, had lives. And now, in this place of judgment, their ghosts had looked upon him and asked the one question he could not answer. Why? The cavern did not tremble again. No more visions came. But something unseen had shifted. To choose. That was what the voice had said. Not to suffer. Not to be punished. To choose. But choose what? His mind grasped at the possibilities, each more impossible than the last. Were they to be released? Rebuilt? Could there be mercy after everything they had done? Or was this some final cruelty, a false hope before the end? He exhaled slowly. No, this was not a trick. Humanity did not play games. They had wielded their vengeance with precision, like a blade honed over generations of suffering. If they had wanted the Union leaders dead, there would be no cavern, no illusions. Only fire. That meant there was a choice. He turned to the others, his voice hoarse but steady. We're not meant to die here. The thrall's eyes snapped toward him, dark and wary. Then what? Vorzak met its gaze. We're meant to decide what comes next. The myriad let out a broken chime of sound, bitter and hollow. And what would that be? Begging? Redemption? For the first time since he had awoken in this place, Vorzak did not have an answer. But the voice had been clear. To choose. And as he stood there staring into the unknown, he realized that for the first time in his life he did not know what choice he would make.